Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Yi Yulin was so astonished because he saw that Huo Yuhao was using his spiritual power to control his human-shaped soul tool. As he couldn't move his legs, that must mean that he could directly use his spiritual power to exert control over his soul tool, since it could take a step forward. Furthermore, Huo Yuhao had only used 18 formation arrays, a very small number. Huo Yuhao controlled his soul tool to take a step back. He was also very emotional. It's great to be able to move. I can finally stand up again. He had left his previous human-shaped soul tool with Xian Ziwen to research and continue improving on. He hadn't brought it with him this time. Even if he had, he couldn't possibly use it in this tournament, it would expose him too easily. If things didn't go well, he might even be kidnapped by the illustrious Virtue Hall, and have all his research findings stolen. However, it was different now. He didn't use his identity as Huo Yuhao, but called himself Tang Wu. After this tournament was over, he was going to vanish completely. He created this human-shaped soul tool to help himself in that goal. He eliminated the problem of his immobility, and thus his fighting strength soared. In addition, it was much easier for him to move now. Huo Yuhao looked at the passionate Yi Yulin through the crystal steel and asked with a smile, "Revered Chief Judge, do I pass?" "Oh, yes, yes." Yi Yulin was delighted. The rest of the 6 judges were also fascinated. The way they looked at Huo Yuhao made it seem like they wanted to eat him. They weren't the only soul engineers around. There were also the other competitors, and many of the spectators. It's actually a human-shaped soul tool. The third elder was already very unsettled, and couldn't remain seated. He stood in front of the resting area with a very shocked expression on his face. "Second brother, my dear second brother. You forced me to give this kid to you. Are you seeing this? He's actually made a human-shaped soul tool. He can even use his spiritual power to control it. While his actions were simple, he only used 18 formation arrays. Even if I made something like this, I'd still need at least 40 formation arrays to complete the simple actions that is performed with 18. This kid is a genius, an absolute genius. Such a genius is too important to my future development of soul tools." Nangong Wan was also stunned by what Huo Yuhao had created. However, he had to remain insistent. He smiled and said, "In my opinion, he should be stronger as a soul master. Did you forget the soul skill he demonstrated earlier? In addition, I won't stop him from learning how to create soul tools. You can continue to interact with him." Seeing that Nangong Wan was unwilling to budge, the third elder immediately turned to the vice leader. "Vice leader, you've seen it too. He knows about soul tools. What do you think?" The vice leader replied, "Let's discuss this when the tournament is over. Let's watch the tournament first. I just received news that there might be people from Shrek Academy nearby. They won't ambush us now, but that doesn't mean they won't target us. Everyone be prepared to fight. The only thing that we have to avoid now is internal conflict." After hearing her words, Nangong Wan and the third elder were afraid, and hurriedly nodded. On the stage, Huo Yuhao's human-shaped soul tool made the rest of the competitors apart from Hikaitu Grim. He actually made a human-shaped soul tool. However, can his soul tool really fight? Is it really strong and flexible enough? How can it fight without any offensive weapons? Huang Jing suddenly thought of something. Surely this fellow isn't going to use his evil soul master methods to fight again. However, the other 2 underground organizations should already know about his abilities. Is there really no way they can target him? The soul tools made by the rest aren't easy to deal with either. We'll carry out the technical test now. Some special techniques used to create soul tools and formation arrays are very pertinent. It's only by using these techniques that one can achieve greater heights. We'll need all of you to complete some techniques within a set time in this technical test. The last to complete them will be eliminated. Yi Yulin tried to suppress his excitement while recounting the rules to the competitors. Very soon, every soul engineer was presented with a tray. This tray was squarish, and there were 9 grids on it. On each grid was a squarish piece of rare metal. Each of the 9 pieces of rare metal on each tray was a different color. Given the abilities of the competing soul engineers, they could naturally recognize what these rare metals were. Huo Yuhao could also tell, of course. He didn't leave his human-shaped soul tool. To him, the feeling of standing was too comfortable. He only put his wheelchair away, in his own storage-type soul tool. After scanning the 9 pieces of rare metal in front of him, he had already developed a spectrum in his mind. The 9 pieces of rare metal were arranged from hard to soft. The first piece was extremely hard, and the last piece was extremely soft. In short, they were all of varying degrees of hardness. To ensure fairness, none of you can use your own carving knife. You must use the blade on the tray. What you have to do is to use specific techniques on the 9 pieces of rare metal to create 9 different formation arrays. For the first piece, you need to drill 30 holes. For the second piece, you need to carve 50 tortuous curves that are proportionately separated. For the third piece, you'll need to carve an image of a windmill. For the fourth piece. As Yi Yulin read out the requirements, all the soul engineers started to turn a little dismal. 9 different techniques, from the easiest to the most difficult. However, they all roughly knew how to do them. However, they turned grim once again, as they saw the rare metals in front of them. Different rare metals were suitable for carrying out different tasks. The rare metals in front of them were the most unsuitable for performing the techniques required of them. For example, they had to drill 30 holes in the first piece of rare metal, which was the toughest. It was too difficult, and they couldn't use their own carving knives. They could only use the one on the tray, which was made of ordinary fine steel. How much soul power would they need to expend to complete this technical test? In the end, they still had to carve the most complicated image on the softest piece of rare metal. No wonder Yi Yulin warned them that the technical test wasn't going to be easy. Not easy was an understatement. Yi Yulin didn't care what they thought. After he announced the rules, he didn't even bother explaining again. He immediately shouted, "The technical test begins. All of you have 15 minutes to complete this test. If no one can complete all 9 techniques, we'll rank you based on the number that you've completed." At this point, night had already fallen after the 6 hours allotted to the competitors to create their soul tools. However, the 9 competitors weren't tired at all. They all started at the same time. Their martial souls were different, and thus they each had their own ideas. Hikaitu's idea was the simplest and crudest. He bit on a cigar that helped to restore his soul power, and directly used his soul power to strengthen the carving knife, before he started to carve forcefully. Compared to him, Huo Yuhao seemed to be more technical. For the first piece of rare metal, he used a special method that only he could perform. After all, there weren't any rules that forbade damaging the rare metals. "Aren't you very tough? I'll make you stronger then." He pressed the metal with his left hand and poured in his soul power from his ultimate ice. The temperature of the metal fell to -200 degrees Celsius. This extreme temperature was very damaging to the rare metal. After this, Huo Yuhao lifted the carving knife with his right hand. He couldn't just drill the holes forcefully. The sizes of the holes had to be the same, and they had to be circular and flawless. This was the definition of success. After he placed his carving knife in position, his eyes turned slightly gray. Following this, a streak of green light shone on his hand. He was in his human-shaped soul tool now, and only opened the hand compartments, so he could start carving. No one could see his eyes. A small green spot slowly formed on the metal. After this, Huo Yuhao retracted the low temperature of his ultimate ice, and the metal started to fume with smoke. This was known as a corrosive light, from the necromantic arts. It was extremely corrosive and destructive to all matter. Huo Yuhao was able to use this technique with his current spiritual power, but he couldn't lock onto his target with this corrosive light, and it only covered a small area. However, it was pretty effective when used on metals. The rare metal that had been frozen earlier was corroded now. The structure of the metal broke down further. At this point, Huo Yuhao used more of his soul power and pushed his carving knife through the metal, which was much easier now. His control of this corrosive light was very good, it didn't spread elsewhere. He first drilled a hole before using this light to expand it slightly. In this way, he conserved more soul power than the others. The rest of the technical test was basically a proficiency test of his techniques. While he had yet to fully restore his spiritual power, he was still very familiar with these techniques, even without the help of his spiritual detection. He wasn't any slower than the rest of them. Moreover, his spiritual power recovered rather quickly. The sense of weakness he had felt had already disappeared. His condition was even improving. The 7 judges were impressed as they saw how the competitors were progressing. They had to admit that these soul engineers had very strong foundations. No one made any obvious mistakes. Huo Yuhao wasn't the fastest, but he was among the top 3. Yi Yulin understood why Yuhao wasn't the fastest. He was tired. Considering how tense Huo Yuhao was when he made his soul tool earlier, it was quite commendable that he could maintain a top 3 position in this technical test. However, Yi Yulin didn't know that Huo Yuhao didn't leave his human-shaped soul tool just because he was afraid of trouble. His soul power amplifier was taking effect, which greatly helped to conserve his soul power. Those who were competing today were at least class 6 soul engineers. While Huo Yuhao had twin martial souls, he also only had 5 rings. It was better for him to conserve his soul power right now, as there were other things he had to do later on. He Kai too used a lot of soul power to complete the technical test. He seemed to gain the upper hand, however, as he was the first to complete it. At this point, more than 3/4 of the 15 minutes had passed. Huo Yuhao had been monitoring He Kai Tu's movements. Seeing that he had completed the test, he also increased his speed, and was second to finish. The third was a young lady in yellow from the Common Alliance. The fourth was Huang Jing. From this technical test, it was clear that the 3 from the Duskwater Alliance were slightly stronger. An Litong and Shangguan Weia looked a little grim at this point. This was especially so for An Litong, as the 3 representatives from the Alto Chamber of Commerce were obviously slower. Time's up. This time, Yi Yulin had no intention of delaying. He immediately ended the test when the last grain of sand in the hourglass fell. 5 of the 9 completed the test, while the other 4 failed to do so. After the judges made their decision, they eliminated 1 representative from the Alto Chamber of Commerce, as he had the lowest completion rate. It wasn't much of a surprise. The 2 others from the Alto Chamber of Commerce that had qualified were ranked 1st and 3rd from the bottom. The 1st from the bottom had to face the 1st from the top, which was He Kai Tu, whereas the 3rd from the bottom had to face the 3rd from the top, which was the lady in yellow from the Common Alliance. At this point, Nangong Wan revealed a satisfied smile on his face in the resting area. Huo Yuhao and the other 2 were 3 of the top 4 in the technical test. This was a delightful surprise. He hadn't expected He Kai Tu to be the fastest. He only realized at this point that this tall and burly young man, who wore a mask all the time, actually had a pretty strong soul power cultivation. No wonder he was a class 7 soul engineer. Huo Yuhao, He Kai Tu, and Huang Jing were all in the top 4, which meant that they wouldn't face one another in the following elimination round. If the 3 of them could all reach the semifinals, the Duskwater Alliance was very likely to become the champion. Nangong Wan was very confident in Huo Yuhao and Huang Jing. The others didn't understand why Huo Yuhao would produce a human-shaped soul tool, but he could roughly guess. Wasn't his intention very simple? He was trying to increase his mobility and flexibility. He was an evil soul master, and no ordinary soul engineer either. Even without any offensive weapons, was it really impossible for him to curb his opponents? Nangong Wan was also very confident in Huang Jing. After all, Huang Jing was the 3rd elder's most outstanding disciple. He possessed roughly the abilities of a class 7 soul engineer, and also had a 6-ringed cultivation. Although his evil soul master abilities weren't that strong, he was very talented in creating soul tools. He even had a ranked carving knife with him. He Kai Tu's surprising ranking meant that he was most likely facing the weakest of the remaining 8 in this tournament. At this point, the Duskwater Alliance was in a very favorable situation. All of you are to be given a 5-minute rest. After 5 minutes, the elimination round will begin. Yi Yulin said. Immediately, several staff members rushed up to the stage and carried the carving tables and leftover materials away. The competitors descended the stage and returned to the resting area for a short rest. Huo Yuhao was ranked 2nd. His opponent was going to be a young lady in a blue dress from the Common Alliance. He was going to compete in the 2nd match. There wasn't too much planning behind the order in which they competed. The highest-ranked competitor would compete in the 1st match, followed by the 2nd-ranked, 3rd-ranked and 4th-ranked competitors. Thus, one could have more rest later on if they competed earlier. There wasn't anything unfair about this arrangement. In addition, they still had these additional 5 minutes of rest. Nangong Wan went forward personally to receive Huo Yuhao and the other 2 competitors. Huo Yuhao had proved with his actions that his human-shaped soul tool was working. His soul tool closed up and he descended from the stage. Even though his human-shaped soul tool was much smaller than the one the illustrious virtue Huo came up with initially, it was still a human-shaped soul tool. Yi Yulin's gaze never left him. Seeing that Huo Yuhao had left the stage leisurely, naturally, and without any awkwardness, his gaze turned even more passionate. Great. All of you did well. Now rest. You just need to remember that I'll fulfill my promise the second after the tournament is over. It's right here. If you achieve good results, you can claim it. Nangong Wan didn't give out too many instructions. He only emphasized the prize they could claim if they won. He knew that the three of them needed rest right now. The third elder never sat down all that time. His gaze was burning as he looked at Huo Yuhao, scanning the human-shaped soul tool. The soul tool was around 2.5 meters tall. It had a streamlined design, and its silver-white body exuded slight soul power undulations, its eyes releasing a golden glow. If it were painted properly, it would seem even more magnificent. Huo Yuhao didn't sit down, controlling his soul tool to remain standing. He shut his eyes to restore his spiritual power. He had been sitting for too long. The feeling of standing was very magical to him after sitting for so long. In the underground warehouse. Boom. As the explosion shook everything around him, Prince Shugozheng's protective soul barrier flared and blocked the shockwaves coming towards him. This underground warehouse was too firm and secure. When the lift was constructed, it was reinforced to prevent anyone from trying to force their way out. As a result, Shugozheng still needed the help of his subordinates to escape from the elevator through its bottom, even though he was a Class 9 soul engineer. It wasn't considered a feat to escape from the elevator. They still had to escape the elevator shaft. There were 8 of them, and they drifted down along the shaft. However, the main elevator door was now a problem for them again. They had already attacked it 6 times. In such a narrow space, they couldn't use soul tools that were too powerful. Otherwise, they would be the ones in trouble. As a result, they could only try to force openings using weaker soul tools before using close combat soul tools to break through. In such a situation, close combat soul tools became extremely important. A 15-centimeter opening was finally made. These 8 advanced-level soul engineers exerted their full strength at the same time, but it still took 7 to 8 minutes before they made an opening that they could escape through. Shugozheng's face had turned black by this point. His heart ached. He had long since viewed this warehouse as his own. Repairing the elevator and the elevator shaft was bound to cost him an arm and a leg. Right now, he only wanted to tear the thieves to pieces. After he entered the tunnel, Shugozheng saw 2 of his subordinates on the ground. Their corpses had already long turned cold. Everyone could sense the fury that Shugozheng suppressed. 2 people immediately went to search the bodies. Indeed, their keys were no longer there. They quickly ventured in and came to a huge door that led to the first level of this warehouse. Shugozheng wore a gloomy expression as he retrieved his key. He attempted to open the door. As expected, Huo Yuhao didn't give him the opportunity to do so. He had already destroyed and altered the mechanism used to open this door. No matter how the key was turned, the door wouldn't budge. Idiot! Shugozheng finally erupted in anger. He punched the door and groaned. This door was designed to be stronger than the doors of the elevator shaft. It was extremely thick, and constructed using alloys, which were almost as strong as some rare metals. Break the door down! Shugozheng shouted furiously. Your Highness, we might activate the defensive soul tools if we attack the door directly. They will fire at us. A Class 8 soul engineer beside him immediately warned him. Shugozheng was one of the most highly respected figures in the Sun Moon Empire. After his rage subsided, he quickly calmed down. He was clearly aware of the strength of the defensive soul tools installed in this tunnel. Even though he was a Class 9 soul engineer, he wouldn't feel good if he was struck. Class 7 soul engineers might even be killed. The controls for the entire defensive system were inside this warehouse. They couldn't control it from the outside. He took a deep breath and tried to suppress his anger. He wore a grim look and shouted, let's slowly destroy the defensive soul tools before we break down this door. Be quick. Of course, Huo Yuhao didn't know that Shugozheng currently hated him to the core. Right now, he was focusing on his energy and sensing the undulations in his spiritual sea. His spiritual and soul power combined and flowed throughout his entire body. It was very soothing. His spiritual power had improved once again, and it seemed as if he were absorbing the origin energy in his body at a quicker rate now. The remaining origin energy was localized in his dantian now. Time's up. The first-ranked and last-ranked competitors from the technical test earlier, please ascend the stage. The MC's voice sounded up on the stage. Yi Yulin was personally standing at the center of the stage. As the chief judge, he didn't need to do something like this. However, he wanted to observe how Huo Yuhao controlled his human-shaped soul tool close-up later on. He Kai-Tu stood up and bent his back. He lifted his rapid-fire cannon in front of him and walked to the stage. With his well-developed, burly figure, and that huge cannon on his shoulder, he looked rather awe-inspiring. His opponent from the Alto Chamber of Commerce was also already on the stage. The soul tool that he had created was a long war blade. He had chosen a close combat path. The length of his war blade was around the same as Kai-Tu's rapid-fire cannon. The blade of his war blade was around 2 meters long, the hilt as thick as an egg. As he stood there, he also looked very imposing. Yi Yulin looked at Kai-Tu and the representative from the Alto Chamber of Commerce and said, "Both parties, please report your names. Let me reiterate, this match will only end when one party concedes defeat or loses his fighting strength. If you think you can't beat your opponent, please say so you don't make a grave mistake." Tang Sai. Kai-Tu shouted his name in a concise yet assertive manner. Alto Chamber of Commerce, Zhao Shao's. Begin. Yi Yulin suddenly rose into the sky and announced the beginning of the first match. This wasn't a fight like the Continental Elite Youth Soul Master Tournament. It was a real life-and-death fight. This was an underground tournament, there weren't that many rules to protect the competitors. Zhao Shao's pointed his toes to the ground before he charged towards Kai-Tu. His body shone with 3 yellow and 3 purple soul rings. Evidently, he was a 6-ringed soul emperor. He waved his war blade, and it lit up with a blinding, golden-red spark. The surprising thing was that Kai-Tu didn't fire his cannon. He even set it down. It might be because he couldn't do so in time, or he just didn't want to fire it. It was as if the cannon was too heavy, and Kai-Tu couldn't lift it anymore. However, his soul rings rose too. 2 yellow, 2 purple, and 2 black soul rings. There was a huge commotion beneath the stage when everyone saw that his 6 soul rings were of the optimal combination. It was very rare for even a soul master to have the best combination of soul rings, much less a soul engineer. The members of the Duskwater Alliance were naturally greeted with a delightful surprise. However, the members of the Alto Chamber of Commerce and Common Alliance turned grim. Zhao Shao's naturally saw Kai-Tu's soul rings. As he looked at his opponent's soul rings, before looking at the colors of his own soul rings, he realized that he was in trouble. His unstoppable momentum earlier suddenly met with an obstacle. But even though his aura was slightly suppressed by Kai-Tu's soul rings, he didn't slow down. He quickly charged across the center line. As he waved his war blade, he slashed it towards Kai-Tu. Suddenly, this golden-red blade formed a long arc that advanced more than 40 meters before it slashed towards Kai-Tu's head. Its majestic aura was about to slash the stage in 2. The air suddenly became hotter. Zhao Shao's war blade was very exquisite. While it was a close combat soul tool, there were 9 formation arrays in it. As it was strengthened, it was almost as strong as a Class 7 close combat soul tool. Furthermore, it could cover a longer distance than most ordinary close combat soul tools. It was a soul energy weapon. However, Kai-Tu wasn't anxious at all. His legs moved swiftly, and he dragged his rapid-fire cannon along with him. As he shifted, he avoided the slash. A long trench was immediately slashed open as the energy from the war blade struck the ground. The 2 sides of the trench had turned completely red, and they were even melting quickly. This showed how frightening the elevated temperature of this war blade was. However, the spectators couldn't be bothered about the strength of this war blade right now. This was because they were stunned as they were looking at Kai-Tu. Kai-Tu lifted his cannon and charged towards Zhao Shao's. A long-range, offensive-type soul engineer was running straight toward a close combat soul engineer. What was going on? Beneath the stage, Huo Yuhao's eyes had already opened wide. As he watched the situation on the stage, he revealed a slight smile on his face behind his human-shaped soul tool. The real fool is the one who thinks Second Senior is a fool. In terms of fighting strategies, Second Senior is not inferior to anyone. He's trying to catch him off guard. Zhao Shao's also didn't expect Kai-Tu to charge towards him. In addition, He Kai-tu was extremely fast. It was very shocking. Even while he was carrying a rapid-fire cannon, Zhao Xiao's felt as if he were illusory as he burst over. Bei Bei and Huo Yuhao weren't the only ones who knew the Tang sect's ghost shadow perplexing track. He Kai-tu had been in the Tang sect for a long time. The two main Tang sect secret techniques that he cultivated were the purple demon eyes and ghost shadow perplexing track. Even while he had a cannon on his shoulder, he still performed his ghost shadow perplexing track perfectly. Not only this, but the barrel of his cannon also started to light up. Zhao Xiao's was also only stunned for an instant. In the next moment, he swept his war blade and slashed it towards He Kai-tu's waist. At this point, He Kai-tu was still around 15 meters away from him. He was confident of killing his opponent through a series of quick attacks. Zhao Xiao's also didn't believe that He Kai-tu could fire his rapid-fire cannon under such a situation. However, he also discovered that there was an additional cigar in He Kai-tu's mouth just as he swept his war blade. It was a dim golden cigar. He Kai-tu was expelling smoke from his mouth, and a layer of golden light also shone from his body at the same time. He Kai-tu lifted his rapid-fire cannon and used his body to bear the attack of the war blade. Dang! He Kai-tu was still advancing forward as a loud and clear sound resonated. The war blade brushed past his body, but was blocked by a golden barrier. Invincible barrier. He has flouted the rules. This was what Zhao Xiao's thought at first. However, Yu Yulin had no intention of ending their fight. At this point, He Kai-tu had already closed up the gap. He Kai-tu flung his cannon forward towards Zhao Xiao's. Zhao Xiao's was shocked. He quickly used his war blade to block the attack. After all, he was a close combat soul engineer, and he was very confident in his physical strength. However, he didn't know one thing: there were gifted people in this world. He Kai-tu was one of them. Although he wasn't as strong as Wang Qiu'er, he was still superior to most ordinary soul masters. Bang! Zhao Xiao's reeled back. He felt a huge force exerted towards him before the hilt of his warblade struck his own chest. He quickly activated the second state of his warblade. His entire warblade turned a piercing, golden red. Although he couldn't effect a long-range attack, after his warblade changed to this second state, the close-range destructiveness of his warblade was greatly increased. However, he immediately saw He Kai-tu's cannon barreling towards his chest. Zhao Xiao's lifted his warblade straight, without any hesitation, before he used his scorching blade to strike He Kai-tu's cannon. However, he was petrified at the next moment. That was because the light in the barrel of the cannon had suddenly gone off. Rapid-fire cannons derived their name from their ability to fire rapidly. On a battlefield, rapid-fire cannons were used to contain enemies through their firepower. A single strike of a rapid-fire cannon wasn't too strong. For example, a cannon shell fired from He Kai-tu's Class 7 rapid-fire cannon was as powerful as a Class 6 explosive cannon shell. Of course, He Kai-tu's rapid-fire cannon was different from other rapid-fire cannons in terms of its size. If a cannon was too large, it would be too bulky. However, there was a correlation between strength and size. The cannon shell of this rapid-fire cannon was at least 3 times the size of a normal cannon shell. Naturally, it was of greater strength. After he struck his opponent with the barrel of his cannon and forced him back, He Kai-tu immediately pointed the barrel of his cannon toward his opponent. It was a cannon. It wasn't a close combat soul tool, but a cannon that could be fired. However, Zhao Xiao seemed to have forgotten this point after he was forced backward. Under normal circumstances, his golden red blade could slash a rapid-fire cannon in half as if it were a block of butter. However, He Kai-tu placed his rapid-fire cannon right in front of him. No matter what, it was still a cannon. Boom! Everyone could clearly see a very bright ball of light shining between He Kai-tu and Zhao Xiao's. The tremendous explosive force and recoil caused He Kai-tu to be flung back along with his cannon. Zhao Xiao's warblade was indeed very strong, and was worthy of being a close combat soul tool that was almost Class 7. His golden red blade was still pointed straight up, and the cannon shell that was fired towards him had been slashed in 2. However, the 2 halves of the cannon shell still struck him. This tournament was different from any ordinary fight between soul engineers. The soul engineers could only use the soul tools they created. This meant that Zhao Xiao's didn't have an automatic protective soul barrier with him. While the cannon shell was slashed in 2, it was still a cannon shell. The pieces would still hurt when they struck his body. Zhao Xiao's was also flung backward. However, it wasn't his body that flew back. It was scraps of his flesh. His entire upper body had disappeared. Only his legs were left standing on the ground. His war blade swayed for a few times before it fell to one side. The light from his blade also slowly faded away. As his golden red blade hit the ground, it melted. The entire venue went silent. Even though everyone knew that there were no rules in this underground tournament, they still found it uncomfortable when they saw such a bloody scene in front of them. A living person's upper body had been directly blown apart by a soul cannon. At this moment, dry coughs could be heard all around the stage. Apart from the vice leader, the rest of the members of the Duskwater Alliance stood up at this point. Even the number 98 competitor, who hated Huo Yuhao and He Kai-tu, couldn't help but cheer at this point. A long-range soul tool could be used in this manner. Fired straight in front of one's opponent. It was too much. He Kai-tu flew back due to the backblast generated. Right now, he had already landed steadily on the stage. He didn't even look at Zhao Shao's remains. He lifted his cannon, turned around and walked towards the people from the Duskwater Alliance. The first match has ended. Tang Sai is the winner. This video will end here.